Hi folks, welcome back to the Tabletop's Edge and our continuing tutorial on World in Flames, the Collector's Edition. So far, we've showed you how to move your land units across the map and how to keep them supplied, but what do you do when you run into the bad guys? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today in the land combat episode. World in Flames has a number of optional rules that add quite a bit to the land combat in the game. Most of the optionals involve new unit types that have special capabilities, and so I'm not going to discuss any of the optional rules today. I'm going to save those for the episode that deals with the optional rules later in this series. The one exception is headquarters support. Headquarters support is an optional rule, but I am going to talk about it today because number one, it's a very commonly used optional rule, and number two, it just makes more sense to discuss it in this context rather than waiting to discuss it later. That said, combat, or at least land combat in World in Flames, is pretty straightforward. It's an odd-spaced CRT, or combat results table. You're going to simply add up the number of attacking factors and the defending combat factors. You're going to modify it for weather, terrain, and supply status. Then you're going to divide the attacking total by the defending total. You'll get an odds ratio that you'll round down and then roll a d10 on the chart, apply a couple of die roll modifiers, and you'll get your results. Now the devil is in the details though. So let's start taking a look at this step by step. All right, we'll start with the very basics. First of all, attacking in whiff is completely voluntary. You are never required to make a land attack against an opponent. In order to attack an enemy unit, your attackers must be adjacent to the enemy hex and not across a prohibited hex side terrain. For instance, an all-sea hex side or an alpine hex side or a lake hex side. You can combine multiple units from multiple hexes into a single attack, and you'll do that when you declare attacks at the very beginning of the land combat phase. So in this example here, we could have Rommel's stack and the 4 units in the 2 armor stacks all combined to attack the Soviet armor stack. It's also possible to have some units in one stack attack one hex and other units attack a different hex. However, you cannot split the factors on an individual unit. So each unit must attack one and only one enemy in each phase. So for example, Rommel's stack here, we could have Rommel combined with the 2 armor stacks down here to attack the Soviet 1st Tank Army. And then we could declare the SS Panzer Grenadier Corps will combine with the infantry stack here to attack Vatutin's hex. However, we could not have the SS Panzer Grenadiers declare they're going to attack Vatutin with 5 factors and then spend their other 4 to attack down here. So it's all or nothing with the units, but the units themselves within the stacks can be split up as you see fit. Now, WIF has a very distinct or very structured sequence for running through and resolving the land attack. So let's talk about that right now. The first thing you're going to do at the beginning of your land combat phase is to declare all of your attacks that you're going to make in that phase. And that simply consists of identifying which units are attacking which hexes. For example, we would go through and we could say these 2 stacks are going to attack this hex, and Rommel and the infantry will be attacking Vatutin's hex. That's the declaration of attacks. Once all of the attacks are made, which would include any potentially para-dropping units, the defender would then announce which notional units are being ignored, and we'll talk about notional units more in a second. Then the attacker will add any offensive shore bombardment, followed by the defender declaring any defensive shore bombardment, after which the attacker will announce offensive HQ support, followed by defensive HQ support. Then you're going to fly and resolve all of your ground support missions, and then finally, you will resolve the land combats one by one in the order that the attacker chooses. Now let's take a little closer look at some of these steps involved in the process. Now you heard me discuss notional units. So what exactly is a notional unit? Anytime a hex is attacked by an invasion or by a paradrop, there is a notional unit that exists within the hex essentially representing units below the corps and division level that we have represented in our counters in this game. That notional unit has an unmodified combat factor of 1. There are certain ways you can then modify that, and that notional unit's strength is going to be added to the defending stack's strength for combat. There's a very handy chart in the upper left of the Pacific maps, printed right on the map here, which gives you all of the ways to calculate the notional unit combat factor. So you're going to start off with a value of 1. You'll apply any of the cases that may be relevant, and you'll come up with a notional total, which then is added to the defenders. An important thing to remember about notional units is that they are always considered face down, which means, as you'll see later when we get to the die roll modifiers in combat, that notional unit will give the attacker a +1 to his die roll, which is why there may be times when the defender does not want to include his notional units in the combat, and that's why the second phase of the land combat sequence is for the defender to declare which of his notional units will be ignored. Also, it may be a situation where you've got some attacking units that are blitz capable and may be able to advance more than 1 hex, and the defender knows that the attacker is going to definitely win the hex, and he doesn't want to allow the attackers to be able to advance that extra hex, so he'll just declare that the notional unit is being ignored. As if playing the Chinese weren't hard enough as it is, the rules state that the Chinese nationalist units only attack at half strength. They do defend at full strength, but attacking, they are halved. That only applies to the nationalists, though, not to the Chinese communists. The Chinese communists do get to attack and defend at full strength, just like every other unit. So just something to keep in mind when you are contemplating that big Chinese nationalist offensive. Anytime a combat occurs in a coastal hex, whether it's an invasion or just a regular land combat, like in this example here, where these 2 Japanese corps will be attacking this British garrison corps on the coast, one or both sides may be able to add some shore bombardment to their combat total. In this case, the Japanese happen to have some surface combat ships at sea in the Bay of Bengal. All you do is total up the shore bombardment factors, which is the lower right of the ships in question, and add their total to the attacking total. There are a couple of things to watch out for. First of all, the shore bombardment modifier the shore bombardment factor is modified by the number in the upper left of the box that they happen to occupy. So in the case of the 2 battleships here, they have a 0 modifier. If we were to use the ships in the 2 box, 1 would be subtracted from each, not total, but each of the ship's shore bombardment factors. So the Mutsu would have a shore bombardment of 2, while the Chikumas would become a 0. Note also that there's an asterisk next to the boxes, the numbers in these boxes in the 1, 2, and 3 box. That asterisk indicates that whenever it's rain or snow in this weather zone, you add 1 to this number. So in rain, this would become a -1, making each of these a 2, and this would become a 2. Again, the Chikuma would be 0, and the Mutsu would be reduced to 1. You cannot provide any shore bombardment from the 0 box, and that's noted by the none in the upper left corner there. Also, you can only add a number of ships worth of shore bombardment equal to the number of land units that are actually attacking. So in this example, there are 2 Japanese land units attacking, which means at most we could take 2 ships down here to provide shore bombardment. In this case, we're going to get the most bang for our buck with the 2 battleships in the 3 box. However, the amount of shore bombardment, which would normally be 6, cannot exceed the total number of land factors that are attacking. In this case, we have 11 factors, but they are attacking across a river hex side, which means they're going to be halved. So we have 5.5 factors attacking on land, which means any shore bombardment in excess of 5.5 factors is ignored. So both of these ships could lend shore bombardment, which would be a total of 6. We would ignore the extra half factor. So the Japanese in this case would have 5.5 land plus 5.5 shore bombardment for a total of 11 factors attacking 5 defending factors, which would be a 2-to-1 odds on the CRT. And one last thing about shore bombardment. After a ship adds shore bombardment to a land attack, you will turn it face down. It will remain at sea, and in its sea box, it will just be face down. Also, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but a ship must be face up in order to add shore bombardment to a land combat. So essentially, you're going to be able to add your shore bombardment to one land combat throughout the turn. Now, let's take a look at HQ support. After both sides have the opportunity to add any shore bombardment they desire, the attacker then has the opportunity to allocate up to one face-up headquarters unit to provide offensive headquarters support to the attack. Now, the headquarters unit must be one of the units that is attacking the hex. So as an example here in southern Russia, the Germans have declared an attack against the Soviet armor hex, and they're attacking with the units in these 3 hexes. There's no shore bombardment since the hex is an inland hex, but the Germans are going to declare Rommel as providing offensive HQ support. After the attacker makes his declarations, the defender has an opportunity to allocate up to one defending face-up headquarters unit to provide defensive HQ support. Now, the defending headquarters must be either in the hex being attacked or adjacent to the hex being attacked. In this example, Vatutin is not adjacent to the hex being attacked, so he would be unable to provide HQ support. However, if his own hex was being attacked, or if the 5-3 infantry army here was being attacked, he would be able to provide that HQ support. You will total the offensive reorganization value of the attacking headquarters. You will subtract the reorganization value of any announced defending HQ that are giving headquarters support, and then divide that total by 4. You then round that, and that will be a positive die roll to the resolution if the attacking is greater than the defending. Sounds a little complicated, but it's not that hard. In this case, there is no defensive HQ support, only offensive HQ support. So we would take 3 minus 0 divided by 4 is 3/4 or 0.75. 0.75 rounds to 1, which means when the Germans attack, they will get a +1 for their offensive HQ support. Instead, if these 2 German units were attacking Vatutin's hex and Rommel was declared as providing offensive HQ support, and the Soviet decided to have Vatutin apply defensive HQ support, the 3 minus Vatutin's 3 would be a 0, divided by 4 would be 0. The 2 would in effect cancel one another out, and there would be no die roll modifier. Now, with HQ support, after the advance after combat step, the HQs that provided support are turned face down. So there is some thought that needs to be given as to whether or not or when you want to provide HQ support. Now, the last step before resolving any land attacks is to fly ground support, and both sides are involved in this particular step, just like the previous 2 with shore bombardment and HQ support. The first thing that you're going to do is the defender is going to fly any combat air patrol missions, or CAP missions. These are basically, we'll talk about in a little more detail with the air missions episode, which is coming up next, right after this land combat episode. But essentially, the defender will fly any fighters to hexes upon which an attack has been declared. So in this example, we're going to say that these 3 German stacks are going to attack the Soviet tank army stack here. The defender has an opportunity to fly a CAP mission, and he would fly this to all of the declared attacks for this current phase. After the defender flies his CAP, the attacker would then fly any bombers, escorts, and or interceptors, any CAP missions of his own. So in this case, the German has decided that he's going to take these 2 bombers here and use them to support the attack. So he will fly them 3 hexes into the attack, and he is going to escort them with the 109 fighter as well. So these 3 aircraft will fly to the declared attack. If the attacker wanted to fly some cap of his own, anticipating some defensive air support coming in to different attacks, he would do that at this time as well. Now that the attacker has flown his bombers and escorts and any cap missions, it's now the defender's turn to fly his bombers and escorts, as well as any aircraft that he wants to intercept the enemy missions. So the Soviets do have a couple of bombers located nearby that are within range and can provide some defensive air support. So they're going to fly them into the battle. And they're also going to use the I-17s here that are in range as interceptors to intercept the German aircraft. Once the defender has flown all of his aircraft to all of the declared attacks, the attacker then has one final opportunity to fly interceptors of his own. So the Germans will now commit this last fighter as an interceptor to intercept the incoming Soviet aircraft. Once all of the aircraft have been committed, again, for all of the attacks, you will then resolve all of the air-to-air combats one by one. And so we take a little diversion here. We will resolve this combat, and the surviving bombers, the bombers that get cleared through after the attack, then would add their tactical factors, which is the number here in the lower left corner. They would add this to the combat value of the land units involved. So in this example, you can see in our hypothetical air combat, both of the German bombers made it through and one of the Soviet bombers made it through. So the Germans would total their tactical factors, which gives them 5. 5 would be added to the total of their land units. In this case, they've got 15 and 16 is 31, 40, 46 ground factors, plus 5 gives them a total of 51 attacking factors. The Soviets got one of their bombers through, and that's going to add his 2 tack points to the 12. So we have a 56 to 14. And we are now ready to move on to the actual resolution of the combat. So let's take a look at the combat results tables. All right, we've now come to the resolution step of the land combat phase for each of the attacks that have been declared. World in Flames has 2 separate CRTs. They have the Blitzkrieg table or the Blitz table and the assault table. So the first thing you're going to have to do is determine which table is going to be used. Generally speaking, the Blitzkrieg table will allow the attacker to stay face up with lower rolls, so you've got a better chance of staying face up. You also have the potential of advancing an additional hex in certain circumstances. And the defender can be retreated on this table rather than taking losses. The assault table is going to be a little bloodier for both sides. So how do you determine which one and who gets to choose? Well, you have to consult the notes here, the land combat notes. And note number 1 is going to guide you in that process to determine which table to use. Essentially, if the defender is in a non-city hex that's clear, forest, or desert, then the attacker has the choice of the combat table if they either have more armor HQs and armor than the defender, or if they have more mech than the defender and the defender has no armor or HQ armor. In our current example, the Germans are attacking the Soviet stack with 3 armor units, and the Soviets only have 1 armor unit. It is a clear hex, which means the Germans meet the requirements of 1A, and so the German will get to choose either the Blitzkrieg or the assault table. Since they're interested in trying to blow a hole through the Soviet lines and start to penetrate them to potentially surround and cut off a portion of the front, they're going to select the Blitzkrieg table. Now, our final modified attacking factors were 56 to 14 defenders. That gives us a 4-to-1 odds ratio, which we'll find the column here. We then simply roll 1d10 and modify that die roll. Now, the land combat modifiers, there aren't a lot of them that are going to apply in every attack, but let's take a second and look at the land combat modifier chart from the rulebook. Here's the land combat modifiers for the die rolls, and I really wish they had put this chart somewhere on the maps like they've done with the Notional unit combat factor chart, and they put some really helpful small charts around the edges of the maps. And this is one that you're going to be referring to fairly often, pretty much every time you make an attack, at least until you get it memorized. So it would have been helpful to have this on the board, I think. But that said, as you look down, I believe there's about 13 different potential modifiers. However, you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them are optional rules. So if you're not playing with those options, you don't even have to bother with those. I won't go through and go over each and every one of these, but I do want to point out a couple of the more common ones. First one up top here, this +1 to the die roll, that's for each face down land unit, including the Notional, which is always considered to be face down. This is very common and it's very helpful. You're gonna find that one of the basic tactics in the game is to launch some ground strike missions to invert defending units and then attack them later in that turn, because each +1 roughly equates to about 1 column shift on the CRT. So it's not an insignificant modifier, and that's probably the most common you'll see. Now the next one is in the blitz combat, you'll get a straight +1 if you have more attacking HQ armor or armor than defenders. So essentially, if you qualify to use the Blitzkrieg table as the attacker and you select the Blitzkrieg table, it's like giving yourself kind of an automatic +1. You look down through some of these, if you have one or more para units that are para dropping into the hex, that will give you a +1. HQ support is one of the options. That's probably going to be limited to a +1, probably no more than a +1, the way those rules are set up. Defending with a printed factory hex will provide the defenders a -1. So all of the positive modifiers are going to help the attacker, and all of the negative modifiers are going to help the defender. You then, after you've totaled up all of the modifiers and they're cumulative, you will then roll 1d10. In this case, it's a 7. Modify it by any applicable modifiers. In our example, Rommel provided offensive HQ support, which gave them a +1, and they are on the blitz combat with more armor, so that gives them a +2. So the final result is going to be a 9. So let's go take a look at the CRT again and see what that 9 results in. All right, looking back at the CRTs, you will see they're both laid out the same way. They've got odds columns across the top and die roll rows down the left side. Both of them have the same kind of layout, and you'll simply cross-reference your final modified die roll result, in this case a 9, with the odds column and read the results. The results are given as attacker results / defender results. So the single roll will tell you the losses or results for both sides. In this case, we have an asterisk /1B. Now the asterisk indicates, if you refer to the notes, it's got all of the results laid right out for you right here in case you forget. The asterisk means that the remaining attacking land units stay face up. So in our example, the Germans will take no losses and all of the attacking units will remain face up. Normally, when a land unit makes an attack, it will be turned face down after the advance after combat step. However, by getting an asterisk result, it will be able to stay face up, which means it will still be able to move and attack in future impulses in this turn. The little cross symbol here allows half of the attacking units to remain face up. For the defender, they have a 1 and a B. The 1 indicates the number of units that are destroyed. So in this case, the Soviets will lose 1 unit. That unit will go back into the force pool to be rebuilt, or at the Soviet player's option, he can instead scrap that unit, which will remove it completely from the game. It will not go back into the force pool. It will be out of the game and back in the box. The B result. The B result stands for breakthrough. What this means is that you destroy, first of all, it is an S result plus breakthrough. The S results are what you achieve on the assault table. It's a shatter result. If you want to have a way to remember that. So shatter result on the assault table. The B is a shatter result plus a breakthrough. So what does the shatter result mean? You destroy any land units that cannot retreat. You then place the remaining defending land units on the production circle to arrive as reinforcements next turn. So in our case, the Germans, with their B result, the Soviets will have to take one loss. The other unit will be removed from the map, doesn't go into force pool. Instead, it goes directly onto the spiral to return, the production spiral, to return as a free reinforcement next turn. And then during the advance after combat, the Germans will be able to do a breakthrough. So what does all this look like on the map? Let's go take a look. All right, we can see here that all of our aircraft that were committed to ground support earlier in the land combat phase have returned to base. We're now ready to implement the 1B results. So the Soviet player has to decide which of these two units he is going to take as a loss. And in this case, it's a fairly easy decision. The infantry is not only cheaper than the armor unit, but it also arrives out of the force pool a lot faster. So the Soviets will destroy their 4-4 infantry army. The B result then applies to the remaining tank army. The remaining tank army will be placed on the spiral to return as a reinforcement next turn. Now that the hex is clear, the attackers may advance into the hex after combat. The Germans will advance basically up to the stacking limit into the hex. Now, because they received a breakthrough result, since the defending hex is clear or desert, and it only costs one movement point to enter because of the weather, they can then advance a second hex if it is an armor unit or a mechanized unit or a motorized unit that was stacked with an armor unit and is accompanying it. So you can see down here, the 9.5 armor and the 6.5 motorized corps can advance into the hex and then continue into a second hex, allowing them to advance to that point. After all advance after combat has been completed, because Rommel provided headquarters support, he is then turned face down. At the end of this particular land combat phase, this is what the situation would then look like. Now, if the defending hex allows for a breakthrough and the attacker takes that breakthrough, if this second hex costs 2 movement points or more, the attackers would be turned face down. But in this case, it's summertime in southern Russia, the weather's great, and the movement costs are both 1, which will allow them to exploit into the gap here. That's pretty much it. That's all at least the basic core stuff for land combat. As I mentioned at the beginning, there are a lot of optional units that add a few things here and there, but basically the process does not change. And after this, you should be ready to go with any of the land combats you'll come across in War of Flames. Up next, as I mentioned, is air missions. We'll talk about the aircraft. We've talked about the counters themselves and what the values are. Now we're going to take a look at how you use aircraft in the game of WIF, and then we'll follow that up by looking at the naval units last. So thanks for watching today. Appreciate you tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe and click like, and we'll see you next time.